Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad that you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. I have invited back one of my favorite all-time comics. He's not just an ordinary comic, folks. He's a venerable Jewish-born holy man from Brooklyn who did his pranams and sadhana on the Borscht Belt, Steve Behrman, known famously and worldwide as Swami Beyondananda. Steve, his alias, is the author of Swami for Precedence, a 7-step plan to heal the body politic and cure erectile dysfunction. And today we'll be speaking with Swami Beyondananda and no doubt also Steve Behrman about any number of things having to do with the body politic and what we can actually do with that body that's a little bit more innovative than has happened to date. Also, just to let you know that Swami Beyondananda really is a world-renowned comic and humorist, writer, performer, and uncommentator. He's been really in many, many different interesting circles. And he's also really quite a writer who, in fact, collaborated with cellular biologist Bruce Lipton, who's a very good friend of mine and of A Better World, of course. Many of you know that. And in a really wonderful work called Spontaneous Evolution. And we may touch upon that as well as this show goes on. Steve says that he was pursuing a career as a teacher and a writer when a funny thing happened, as they say, on the way to the forum. The name Swami Beyondananda flew into his head and apparently never left. That was back in 1979. As Steve tells it, I got struck by enlightening during a brainstorm. So you could piece that together yourself. I would call that Jewish haiku, if you will. And we'll see where we go from there. Hello, Swami Beyondananda. Such a pleasure to have you on A Better World again.
Oh, I'm glad that somebody has a better world out there. And I wouldn't say it's exactly haiku. I would say it's a little lower. It's loku. So you take the haiku, I'll take the loku, and I'll get it lightened before you.
I guess maybe I'll just take the middle coup. You know?
Oh, okay. Well, that would be a coup of all kinds. Yes.
That would be a coup, all right. And we see coups all over the place. We'll be in good company with our politicians.
Well, we could put the coup in Kundalini, that's for sure. Okay.
That's where it's probably best, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Oh my God,
that's cool. Yes.
Indeed. Where have people been willing to giggle with you lately, Swami Beyondananda?
Well, first of all, I am on the internet and on the outer net. I recently returned from a tour of the Southwest, and I was in, we started in Santa Barbara, then we were in we were in Scottsdale and Prescott, Arizona, Santa Fe and Albuquerque, Boulder, Colorado. Yes, the Mile High State.
Yeah.
Now a mile higher than it was last time I was there.
Yes.
And then we ended up in Austin and Fort Worth, Texas, where I was a sacred cowpoke. I lived in Texas for a while.
Yes.
Did you know that? Yeah.
No, I did not know.
I studied with a guru who actually advocated eating beef, and his name, of course, was Barbecue.
Well, it was good that he was stationed in Texas because they're famous for barbecue. Oh, so he sort of had one, you could say, he had one leg up from the beginning with that crowd.
Oh, that's right. Well, that's right. And it's very interesting, but everywhere I went, people really, there's two kinds of people in the world. Of course, there's the kind who divide people into two kinds and the kind that don't. We know that. But then among the people who divide people into two kinds, there are the people who love to laugh, and then there are the people who need to laugh. And so I found that there was a great need for laughter. given the serious condition that the world is in, which is in a way largely due to our conditioning to be serious. So we created this evolutionary uprising to help people wake up and wise up, wake up laughing, wise up loving, and recognize that we are the leaders we have been waiting for. You know, I mean, we've gotten strung out on opium, like we did several years ago, but actually we are really the leaders that we've been waiting for. And when we laugh, it actually helps us see more clearly because laughter causes breathing. And as we know, breathing is the key to long life. And as we breathe, what happens is oxygen goes to the brain, makes us more creative. We have more synapses synapsing. And instead of being manipulated by fear, then we are empowered by the power of love. And you know, that is the one great gift that has been given to the human heart, is the power of love. And it's time for us to activate that power if we want to achieve critical mass before we hit critical massacre.
Yes.
To put it
Let's
bluntly.
go for the former instead of the latter.
That's right. And, you know, this is a universe of infinite possibilities, and so anything can happen. And I tend to imagine, from my experience, that we live in a make-believe world. We make what we believe. So if we believe that the power of love does have that power, then we will make a world and live into that universe where love is the ruler, where the golden rule overrules the rule of gold. And right now we have had the rule of gold overrules the golden rule. And the rule of gold, of course, is do unto others before they can do unto you. And we have been living by that rule of the lowest common denominator for 5,000 years, and now we are awakening to recognize, and this is something that Bruce Lipton will tell you, that we are all cells in the body of a large superorganism called humanity. So under our skins, we have a community of 50 trillion cells. They all get along. You know, we have universal health care, full employment, and no cell left behind. And the organs cooperate with each other. You know, we never hear about the liver invading the pancreas, demanding the islets of Langerhans. You never hear about that.
Right.
And so if we were as smart as ourselves, we would recognize that we are all cells in this larger body called humanity, and much of what we do on this planet, whether it's warfare or whether it's other toxic forms of exploitation and unfair competition, we are engaged in autoimmune dysfunction. We have one part of the body fighting against another part, when if we were really working together in concert and dancing together in rhythm and flow, we can turn the funk into function and leave the junk at the junction.
That's beautiful. Yes. That's beautiful. You, I think, have a platform for a real political party. And God knows it's another party that we really need. But I don't mean a party like just a group of politicians hanging around. I mean a party.
I agree with you. I think we should have one big party and invite everybody.
Exactly. Everybody step right up. I think maybe we should say, are you a member of humanity? And if so, come to the party.
And bring your gifts to the party, because each of us has been given a special gift just for entering. So, my friends, you are already a winner. And this is
exactly.
No, this is true. You know, each of us is totally unique, just like everybody else, and yet we are all one with the same one. That is the paradox. And seriously, if we allowed ourselves to be in full community, we would have more freedom than we have right now, because we would be free of having to fight other healthy cells and recognize that, I think Oscar Wilde said it, be yourself, everyone else is taken.
Exactly. I love that line. Exactly. Too funny. It's true. when you look around, Steve, at the world as as it's being portrayed through our media, not with an exception of A Better World and other sensible alternative media, let's call them. What do you see? What do you see how humor could help to humorize this world out of the anger instead of what we know is way more fun and healthy for that 50 trillion cell community called the human body?
Well, it's interesting. I appreciate you asking that question because I think we have to acknowledge that we have been ruled by what the Swami would call the lowest common denominator for the past 5,000 years, and that's left a lot of residue. We as a species have to acknowledge that we've been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's even worse for the psychics because they have pre-traumatic stress disorder. But nonetheless, we've been suffering from this for a long time. And so many of our human endeavors, with good intentions, of course, have been tainted by this shadow part. And what's very exciting, people say these are apocalyptic times. Well, the original meaning of the word apocalypse, it meant the lifting of the veils. And so simultaneously, the veils are being lifted from both the awful truths and the awesome opportunity. And the awful truths, of course, we're seeing the revelations of exploitation and inhumanity and, dark shadows. I don't know about you, but I don't want to see our government naked,
But really? The emperor has no clothes. Well, then clothe him, doggone it. Please, quickly. Take my look. I'm going to donate my loincloth.
Okay, well, it would be a loining experience then. Yeah, well, live and loin, as we say. But anyway, what we're seeing is that the toxic secrets are being revealed, and simultaneously, in our lifetime, and certainly in the last 25 years, and certainly since you've been doing A Better World Radio, that a lot of these spiritual practices have been kept in protective custody because the human beings have not been mature enough to actually use them wisely. And we've seen Kabbalah, and we've seen shamanic practices, Ayurvedic medicine, Qigong, Chinese medicine, shamanic rituals. All of these things are now, Hopi elders said, please take our stuff. You need it. We've been keeping it. Now is the time. Oi, So
that's right.
We have tremendous resources at our fingertips. And to use another analogy that Bruce and I used in spontaneous evolution, we are in this. We're in the chrysalis right now, in between the caterpillar and the butterfly, and we see chunks of falling caterpillar everywhere we go. And we're beginning to notice the emerging butterfly in the form of imaginal self, imaginal souls. The 35% of our adult population here that Paul Ray has designated cultural creatives, and people who are waking up to this connection, our own connection to spirit, our connection with one another, our connection to the web of life, to our own creativity, and the power of laughter. There's something about laughter that stops the mind, and it liberates us from this or that. It liberates us from the ordinary ways that we've been thinking. And it's interesting that one of the only ways that political truths can be told these days is through humor. And we've had the great political educators of our time have been Jon Stewart and Bill Maher and John Oliver and Colbert, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, very true.
Who are basically looking at the naked emperors and essentially pointing out the contradictions and the ironies. I call it pumping ironies. They're pumping ironies.
Pumping irony, right. Yeah.
And so that's where I see the function of humor as a tool for awakening and to rehearten ourselves.
I believe that. That's a beautiful way of putting it, Steve. I really appreciate it. Well, you have a certain kind of very kind of pleasant and endearing nature of being schizophrenic, both Swami Beyondananda and Steve Behrman in the same body. Talk about efficient and eco-sensitive. That's brilliant.
I never thought about that. I thought that really, because there are so many of us, the biggest problem we face on this planet, extraterrestrials. We have way too many terrestrials. We don't need any extra. And so the solution, of course, is multiple personalities.
That's right, exactly.
And 10 personalities.
It's sort of like, isn't it what we used to call a two for one?
A two for, this is a 10 for one. 10 personalities in one body, that's efficiency. If we had more people like that, we would need fewer people. That's what I said.
That's right, exactly. Fewer bodies, more people. Maybe we could call it the one. Maybe we could call it the schizophrenic party.
That's right. We have twice as many people.
We have a green party, right? We have a green party. We don't need more green. We have green people. Those are the extras.
Yeah, that's right. The little green folks.
Exactly. We all know them. No, your points are very well made, and I'd like to actually, in giving homage to a generation before the Jon Stewart, Steve Colbert generation, is another one that is more our brethren from the Borscht Belt out here in New York, such as Jackie Mason and Woody Allen and others of that ilk who have been ridiculing the status quo with one foot in and one foot out of a system and able to poke so much fun at it. And through the irony and the satire and sarcasm, they invite people to look at the situation from outside itself and see the nakedness, as we were talking about, and see the rawness and see the foolishness and the other type of schizophrenia that's not so much fun, I think that political humor has been one of the strongest keys in helping to wake people up literally for generations. Mel Brooks. Think about Mel Brooks, Steve, in what was it, Springtime for Hitler? In that
the
film?
Producers, yeah.
The producers. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine taking what was considered I don't want to call it a sacred cow, but rather a profane cow, if you will, and actually putting that on stage on Broadway, a Jew? It's hysterical, right? Or even before that, Charlie Chaplin, who did the same thing about Nazi Germany.
The Great Dictator.
In The Great Dictator, right?
Now, it took 20 years.
Your thoughts?
It was roughly 20 or 25 years after the end of World War II before Mel Brooks could create The Producers, or on TV we could have Hogan's Heroes. It took a while for that, and yet, there is a book called Laughter in Hell, Humor and the Holocaust, and it really talks about, first of all, how Hitler, one of the first things he did was get rid of the cabaret comedians because they had the power to break the trance. And then the other thing is that you probably know is that inside the concentration camps, the Jewish people used humor to give themselves some buffer between the horrific conditions they were experiencing and their true spirit. And to give you an idea, you may even know the story, one of the jokes that circulated in the camps involved these two Jewish guys who decide that they're going to assassinate Hitler. And they know that Hitler's motorcade is going to pass a certain intersection at 11 in the morning, and they're waiting for him. 11 in the morning comes, but he's not there. 11:15, 11:30, when he's not there by 11:45, one of the assassins turns to the other and says, "Gee, I hope nothing's happened to him." So that is the leverage, or we call it leverage, that humor can provide.
Yes.
So here we
brilliant.
are in a similar condition now.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's very relevant that we're discussing this. In fact, along with humor in the camps, there was also a good amount of Yiddish theater that also involved singing and music.
Yeah.
And the point being that the ultimate balm, the great healer, I say this all the time in my work as a therapist and stress management consultant, is, don't worry, be happy that there's nothing that's better for the immune system than a good yoke or even a joke. That's
that's very true. Yeah.
Right? It is. It really is. And what's interesting about our lives today, Steve, is that we can actually measure the effect of a smile. We can measure the effect of a joke and a laugh inside our cellular activity. It's really rather awesome to, you and I know, instinctively and gutturally and intuitively that that's the case, and I think, humanity knows that. But when you can actually see it graphed out these days, or the changes in heart coherence, something you and I are very fond of that, and brain coherence, it's like, oh my God, you mean maybe it sounds like God wanted us to be having a really good time, to feel good, and make each other laugh like a lot in order to stay healthy.
Yeah, and it's funny, ever since Norman Cousins' book, Anatomy of an Illness,
Anatomy of an Illness,
1979, where he writes about curing himself of a disease I can't even pronounce. That's how serious
no one can.
And of course, when he did that through watching Marx Brothers movies and Candid Camera reruns,
that's right.
The medical establishment decided that they're going to start studying the healing power of laughter. And Swami says, well, that's kind of like, well, it works in practice, but does it work in theory? So, so they did. There are many studies that show that laughter changes our physiology. Even smiling. When it doesn't matter how we're feeling, if we simply turn the corners of our mouth upward in a smile, which the Swami calls the levitational pose, pulling the
I love it.
The mouth. What happens is it changes your physiology. Your body thinks you're happy, and you begin to produce different hormones. You begin to produce, dopamine and serotonin, and not the stress hormones. So these things, there's something about the connection between natural connection between laughter and smiling and joy. And, so many times we've, all of us in school, I know I was, you were probably the class comedian in your school, we were told to get serious. And some of us took it way too seriously and got very serious. And we begin to imagine the paradox of all of these people seriously pursuing happiness, that there's something outside of us that's going to make us happy. And you look at people who've pursued happiness, and it looks like they've actually outrun it.
That's right. Steve Behrman, I invited you here today on A Better World Radio to take happiness seriously. Would you please discuss the ins and outs, ups and downs of being happy, but seriously, please. I insist.
Well,
no, it's one of those, again, one of those amazing paradoxes. I'm enjoying your wise words. You're always a wiseacre and an upwising. I love it. It's so beautiful. I used to, when you were talking about being the class comedian and all of that, in fact, you're right. Go to the front of the class. It's true. I did won Most Humorous, and I know you won many more awards than that. But I used to actually, because I think of probably tensions in my own family of origin. You know what it's like to be 14 years old and feel like you want to be out on the road and living your life, but you're in a box called school and you have to perform like a monkey. And I used to amuse myself by I'd imagine myself on stage, Steve, at night, and when I was supposed to be going to sleep, telling joke after joke. It was more like political and social satire. And I would be watching the audience laugh in my mind's eye. and I would be hysterical myself, and that's the way I used to fall asleep. Isn't that crazy?
Well, I think that.
Well, don't answer that, please. Don't answer
comedians. I've talked to many comedians who started out amusing themselves. Of course, my mother caught me amusing myself at a very early age, and essentially recognizing that what kind of crazy world is this? You begin to look at.
That's right.
I think part of the when you begin to dissect humor is really about relating things that don't seem to be related in a novel way.
Right.
There's a really interesting book called Why We Laugh and When by a brain scientist named Scott Weems. And he talks about what happens when we laugh. And it's kind of like solving a puzzle.
That's right. It's a resolution of a tension or a contradiction.
Exactly. Yeah. And we are very pleased. It's kind of like solving a puzzle, solving a mystery. And so when the words of a joke fall into place, when there is I never thought of it that way. So a lot of what comedians do, whether it's Seinfeld or whether it's Stephen Wright or any of the comedians we have today, I like Dimitri Martin as one of our contemporary comedians. When they start putting something together, you go, wow, I never thought of that. And yet that's a wild and crazy connection between these two things. And we smile or we laugh because we're delighted having the mind being tricked. A joke is a trick of the mind, you know that there's going to be a punchline at the end. You know it's going to be a surprise. We laugh at the surprise. You ever wonder why jokes are 1, 2, 3, a minister, a priest, and a rabbi? A minister, a priest, and a rabbi are discussing their legacy. How do they want to be remembered? What do they want the eulogist to be saying as they're laying in their casket? And the minister sings. He says, well, I want them to say he was a family man and a pillar of the community. And the priest said, I want people to say he was a holy man and the leader of his flock. The rabbi says, I want people to say, look, I think he's breathing. So, in a world,
exactly.
In a world of dueling dualities, it points out a third way that was unexpected, and we laugh because we've been, the mind is surprised and delighted.
You're hovering around another important point. It sounds like all of a sudden we're doing the anatomy of humor. I don't know where this came from, but probably from, well, we'll discuss that another time. But, you're basically implying the importance of threes. So in a sense, you are invoking the power of sacred geometry. And we know, there's the priest, the minister, the priest, and the rabbi. So, what is it about threes and, bump that is another biological function of the power of humor?
It takes us out of the dueling mind. In our...
That's correct.
We live in a world of duality. It's this or that.
That's right.
You're with us or against us, Democrat or Republican, black or white. And what humor does is give us a third way. Another minister, priest, and rabbi story. I was doing my talk at a conference, a health conference, about 15 years ago, and I was talking about irony deficiency. Seeing a doctor won't help, but seeing a paradox will. And I talked about the contradiction of people who called themselves pro-life, but who were in favor of the death penalty. I'm just saying. Well, afterwards, this woman came up to me, and she was very angry because she was anti-abortionist, and she was very upset with me for criticizing that movement. And I could see that. So I started telling her a story, and she doesn't realize I'm telling her a story. And I told her about a TV show where they had three religious leaders, a minister, a priest, and a rabbi, discussing when life begins. And the priest said, life begins at conception. The woman is shaking her head yes because she doesn't know I'm telling her a joke. And then they asked the minister. The minister says, life begins when the baby takes the first breath, and she's shaking her head no. Then they said, Rabbi, when does life begin? He goes, life begins when the children leave home and the dog dies. And this woman started laughing. She started laughing, and then she hugged me. Because this joke was able to point out a different way of seeing than this or that. And that's,
exactly.
This is where we get into spontaneous evolution. This is where we get into humor as an evolutionary tool, because in this emerging new paradigm consciousness that we can feel it, we can see signs of the uprising, that it's on its way. It requires that we emerge from the dualities and find ways of integrating, because every evolutionary step, it includes and transcends. It includes and transcends. It includes and transcends. So you include the duality, you don't deny it, but then you transcend it, not through compromise, but through a breakthrough that is unpredicted by either of those other two. Just like the human being, you or me couldn't be predicted by looking at a sperm or an egg. That doesn't look like you, and it doesn't look like me, and it doesn't look like anyone we're related to. And yet,
I know a few people it looks like.
Yes, that's true. Those eggheads. Anyway, it's not the sperm.
No, your point is very well made. I just realized now I can't call you schizophrenic anymore, Steve. I think I have to call you triplophrenic, because now you're beginning to sound like Ken Wilber.
Oh yes, exactly. And I think there's a lot to that integral view of including things, not denying things, and I think that's really where we're going in our political system. If we wanted to go just a little deeper, we could look at the Democrats and Republicans as being Republican and Democrat being the one is way, way, way over masculinized, and the other is way, way, way over feminized. And in order for us to be wholehearted, whole-brained, and integrated, and actually act as a functional entity, as a body politic, we need to integrate both of these. I see how one or the other doesn't work, and people are kind of thrown to this way or thrown to that way. And in nature, we do have the tendencies toward growth and protection. So nature is progressive in terms of growth. It's conservative in terms of protection. And what we've seen since World War II has been a military-industrial complex that's been focused, quite sadly, on protecting the predators and not the nurturers. And meanwhile, we have this other side, which in extreme political correctness and so on ends up expressing idiot compassion and not really being able to set boundaries when boundaries need to be set. So we need to have growth in the right area. We need to have protection in the right area. And neither of the two political parties as they're constituted right now is capable of providing that.
Absolutely. I'm going to frame this in a way that I'm going to refer to the favorite cuisine of our ancestors, and that's Chinese food and the Chinese.
Yes, exactly.
Because if any of you listeners grew up in a Jewish neighborhood and you had to eat latkes all day long, you sure would like and love Chinese food a lot more than your culinary tastes of origin. So, on that note,
it a wonton, I call it a kreplach. What's the difference, really?
What's the difference? It's between friends, right? It's between mishpacha. So, in fact, the Chinese would express what you're saying here, Steve, regarding the two political parties as extreme yin and extreme yang. And whenever you have an extreme condition of any sort, it's a condition. It's, in a sense, an imbalance, clearly, and a pathology that needs to be corrected through integration and moderation and mediation between the opposites. And that's how you have a healthy life down the middle path, if you will. I want to let everybody know you are listening to A Better World with Mitchell J. Rabin. We are on every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, although I would have to say there's nothing standard about this show. And you can also listen to it at any time in archive at abetterworld.tv. If you do not yet receive our weekly free newsletter, please go to that same website, abetterworld.tv, and sign up. Join the crowd. Join the community. Love to have you. Every Monday at 7 p.m. in Manhattan, we also have A Better World TV. And you can tune in there if you're in Manhattan, directly on television, or through that same website and watch it from everywhere. And we have some real great sung and unsung heroes of society. It's really something to tune into as well as the radio show. So today we are speaking with my favorite Swamiji, Swami Beyondananda, also known as Steve Behrman, holy man from Brooklyn. And interestingly, Steve, you originally studied political history, is that correct? Before
my background, humor? Believe it or not, I majored at Brooklyn College.
Yeah.
I majored in political science. Now, I have to confess, I never got so deep and so far into it that I actually got to poli-sci lab to dissect a politician. I never quite got that far.
Well, the funny thing about political... That's very good. The funny thing about political science is there's no science.
There is no science. But there are principles, and one of the principles that I think is an enduring principle is Lord Acton said that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so when we look at our current political situation, your word, we look at that condition. Our situation is dire. We look at that, and we see that we have had developed over, I would say, certainly since the Reagan era, we've seen the unchecked, unbalanced, unmitigated power of money to the point where it doesn't really matter what you or I or millions and millions and millions of other Americans think or believe or think should happen. If it is not along the lines and plans of those who really do control the political system through their contributions and leverage, then it doesn't happen. And I think that that's really why so many young people, so many millennials have gotten so turned off to the system that they don't vote because they don't want to compromise themselves in voting for a lesser evil. They're waiting for the greater good to show up.
That's right. I think you're right. Yeah.
That's
it's a
where
very
we are.
good point. And it is a system that engages our compromise, as you said, which is really, you could say, it's really against, it's contrary to our fundamental human dignity and integrity. So you have to already bend far in order just to be a citizen who votes. It's a very good point, and I really appreciate it. I'd like to return to that as well in a moment, but I wanted to, well, you know what, since we're sort of in deep with the political situation. Very good. Very good. One of the funniest comedians I find out on the circuit, Steve, is named Donald Trump. It is hilarious. He's, trumping himself all the time, and I think that he's going to be trumping himself out of the race rather soon. And his latest blunder, comic blunder, is going to be what really sort of torpedoes him. That's my opinion. But honestly, of course, he's a New Yorker, so I've got a natural affinity for his type of New York humor. But, I think that what attributes to his success success is, to date, I should say, is that the American mainstream world doesn't really get enough humor, and his New York style peremptory, black and white kind of humor, is just very appealing to the people. We never knew it. I mean, honestly, I'm telling you the truth. That's how what I ascribe his ratings to. It's they'd never heard humor like this before, and he's also, supposed to be wealthy. That's a whole other kind of interesting conversation. But they look at him like he's sort of like from another world, and he's from New York, and they're very curious more than they actually listen to the content of what he's saying. Your thoughts?
I have to offer a caveat and a slight disagreement about that.
Please.
They laughed they thought Hitler was a joke too, because he was so outrageous. I think what's been happening over the past 20 years or so, or 25 years, is that there's been a relentless brainwashing, stupidization program going on, courtesy of Fox News. And, for you evangelical Christians out there, if you look at the numerology of FOX is 666. So that should tell you all you need to know. Yeah, 666, FOX. And so what happened is that the Republican establishment created a monster that it cannot control. It's funny. In September, there was all of this stuff about the end times and the blood moons and all of that, the tetrad.
Yes.
So I went and I looked in the Bible, and I found the most amazing passage. And I'm not making this up. It said that the end times, to know that the end times are near, is when the last trump shall blow. It even uses the word trump and not trumpet. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, we all know Trump blows, so what? And he's a blowhard who's blowing. But I think that...
Where did you find this?
Look
Chapter and verse.
There's a website called Rapture Ready. It's a book of Revelations, and there's a whole bunch. Okay. Just Google the final Trump, and you'll see. And it talks about a trumpet and so on. And yes. I think it could be either taps for our experiment in self-governance, or it could be reveille for an awakening body politic.
Yes.
But what the Republican establishment is discovering is that they have radicalized these people to such an extent and had them, I think the defining moment in the eyes of the Republican Party was the concession speech that John McCain gave in 2008. And as you're watching two things. One, there's Sarah Palin waiting to jump in with her 2 cents that nobody wanted her to give. And you're watching McCain's very old, conservative, patrician cohorts looking at Sarah Palin, like she's the Tanya Harding of politics, and saying this is the future of the Republican Party. So we have a bunch of people who are fact deniers. They've been brainwashed to the point where somehow I call it selfish righteousness, where you can simultaneously be a creationist and a social Darwinist. And so this hardcore, highly brainwashed group of people who react to hearing facts by retrenching with their beliefs is who the Republicans are now. So what you're finding is that 55% of Republicans today, this day, 55% of those identifying as Republicans agree with Donald Trump about the Muslims, of what he said, his most harsh and absurd statement, which is, that's the bad news. The good news is that 55% of Republicans are approximately 25 to 30 of the entire electorate. And the only thing that's standing between a tremendous defeat for Donald Trump and the Republicans, the only thing standing in the way of that happening are the Democrats. Somebody asked Swami, is there any difference between the two political parties? Or, of course there is. The Republicans, they will bend over backwards for the bankers and special interests. Democrats are completely the opposite. They bend over forward.
Forwards for the same bankers.
Here we have the condition. So we have
exactly true.
Hillary, who is a Wolfowitz in Chiefewitz's clothing, a neocon, disguised as neo-lib. And there's something about her that is eminently dislikable and untrustworthy and mealy-mouthed. And yet, unless Bernie really brings this forward with a surge, that's going to be who stands between, the Trump
who wins the nomination.
Is going to win. They're going to win. And I watched an interview with one of Jeb Bush's. They put $30 million into ads and campaigns, and they haven't moved the needle. They haven't moved the numbers because he is not who they're looking for. He is establishment. He's the reason why we were. He represents the reason why we're in Iraq and created the mess in the first place.
It was it's his brother.
Yeah, but the same association.
What I mean is, he's so close to the establishment that it was his brother and Cheney, of course, that got us into this more contemporary mess that we're in today. It's directly traceable. I mean, we could do a larger historical, review of what brought us into that mess, but just to stay somewhat contemporary, we just have to go back to the theft of the 2000 election.
That's right.
We don't have to go back any further. It started with the
stolen election, where the Democrats rolled over. They don't know how to handle bullies.
That's right.
In 2010, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was conservative, very, very active in the Republican Party, ran for Congress, et cetera. And, he's had a number of epiphanies since then. And we were discussing Obama. He wasn't a big fan of Obama, but he said, Obama does not realize that these people are out to destroy him. He has no idea of what they're capable of. And the problem with the Democrats is that they really are afraid of their own shadow, and they're afraid of the shadow. They're afraid to face the shadow pieces in our history, like the Kennedy assassination, like the untold story behind 9/11.
Martin Luther King.
Like all of these things. Martin Luther King and RFK. I call these people coincidence theorists. The coincidence. Coincidence. All three of those guys.
Isn't it a coincidence?
What a coincidence? Well, and it's like WTFU,
Exactly. Coincidences abound, folks. Coincidences abound. It just happens to always fall on these sort of liberal, progressive leaders. But, it's just a coincidence.
And so because they can't face the shadow, they have proven themselves incapable of leadership. So I like to say, I don't really like to say it, but I end up saying it, that the Republicans, they sold their souls to the devil. Whereas the Democrats, they just rented their soul to the devil. It's not quite the same. They equivocate. They want to be on both sides. They do. And they can't be on both sides.
It's a good point. In fact, that really brings up, I think, an important point, and it's an analog is what we were talking about with humor, of dualities, and the power of humor resides so much, Steve, in the resolution of a tension or a conflict that the yin and the yang at extremes brings forward. It begs. And the last words of a joke, for instance, or a piece of humor, resolves. So similarly, or I should say analogously, I have been for independent or third-party candidates for most of the entirety of my voting life, and that hasn't been one election. It's been a couple, and I feel very strongly that we have to hop out of this duopoly, as John Hagelin, former presidential candidate of the Natural Law Party, former Harvard professor of physics, and leader also in the Transcendental Meditation movement, talk about include and transcend and include. He made it very clear that Democrats and Republicans are never going to bring this country to its next, I'll put it this way, evolutionary step that it needs to take. We will be caught in the duopoly, we'll be caught in the duality. So last round, I was behind Rocky Anderson, who I had on these very airwaves many times. This year, I'm looking at Jill Stein of the Green Party, a wonderful woman who I also interviewed in 2012. And I've actually interviewed numerous third-party candidates that many people have never even heard of over the past, 15-plus years, because I feel that even though people say you're wasting your vote, the hell I'm wasting my vote. I'm making good use of it because a popular vote doesn't elect the president anyway, bub. That's another conversation. So I'm making my vote symbolic, saying that this system does not work. It needs a third alternative. Your thoughts?
Well, that's interesting because there is a movement. There is a transpartisan political movement that I've been a part of for about 6 or 7 years that is actually looking to create it may or may not happen in 2016. At first it looked like there was going to be an independent convention in Kansas City. Now I'm not sure that is going to happen. But something that will happen is a way for citizens to gather in a virtual town square. This is happening, and that's the way that we can overgrow the current system. I really appreciate that Bernie Sanders, to make himself relevant, even though he would have, he might have tried to run as an independent, he's doing it through the Democratic Party, because I do feel we have two parties in this country, the Democratic Party and the undemocratic Party. And because of how the system has been rigged to pay to play, the Democrats have had to be the also-rans for the corporate state, and their heart isn't in it, but they feel obliged to play the same game. And Bernie opened up a new conversation, which in a certain sense is an even more visible and audible iteration of the Occupy movement. The transpartisan movement is really looking for that integral. It's not a candidate who is either identified left or identified right, but essentially is identified as we're gonna take the wool over from our eyes. We're going to look at the situation in a whole-brained, wholehearted way. We're not going to look to compromise away and slather over toxic perpetrations. Instead, we're going to look at this from a spiritual standpoint, meaning that there is something sacred at the center of our lives that has been ignored. It's been in our
trampled.
Secular society. There's no recognition. So before there is a third-party candidate, there has to be an enduring movement, independent citizens movement. So in my very small way, one of the domains that I've owned, I've been investing in unreal estate, in virtual domains. One of the domains that I purchased is Independent Citizens United, or ICU. And the ICU idea has about three different, one is intensive care. We intensively care about our country. ICU says, I see what you did last summer, and ICU is I see you. I see you
Brilliant.
as a reflection of me. So,
that's right.
This is,
Namaste.
we haven't launched this, we haven't launched this, and the thing is that is sort of what's required, where there is a central sacred sense that transcends both religion and non-religion, that gives us the opportunity to create a movement that a candidate can ride upon.
Yes. Oh, beautiful. That's I love the whole thing. I want to say something. I want to kind of question one piece of what you said that really was one word, which was your word enduring. I want to say this, that interestingly, in Spain and in Greece, in recent time, actually also in the UK, there has been an uprising of independent parties, well, in the UK, the Labour Party, but let's just say in Greece and Spain particularly. The independent parties arose almost, Steve, out of nowhere and actually took the presidency, if I'm not mistaken, in both cases because of the powerful illusion that was governing the countries, as they do in all countries, and the people became disillusioned, and as a result of that disillusionment, they were able to see clearly, as in your beautiful acronym of ICU, and they elected, out of nowhere, seemingly, a third-party candidate. And so I want to really put this out into the airwaves, that it doesn't need to be enduring up to date. We want it to be enduring over time, but it can spontaneously arise, a movement so large that it will go beyond, transcend, and include our two existing duopolistic parties, and bring no more ideology. The time of ideology is gone. It is the time of, interestingly, quoting Werner Erhard of Est and the Forum fame, who said, a world that works for everyone. Isn't that interesting?
Yep.
Not what do you think and what do you believe, but what works for everyone. I'm sorry?
That he got that from Bucky Fuller. He got that from Bucky Fuller's World Game idea.
Did he really? Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's great.
And yes,
appreciate
and
that.
I remember, the Hunger Project and all of those things having to do with a world that works for everyone. And you see, I think that many people are reaching for that, and we have a mainstream corporate media that doesn't honor that. There are no forums and many against them. They like to have the point and the counterpoint. They like to have these rigidified viewpoints.
They breed war. They breed war and conflict. That's how they sell their drugs.
And see, there are people who are waking up from that. We don't have our own media yet. And I think once we begin to gather outside of that sphere, I think it's happened, in the Black Lives Matter movement. It happened, I'm trying to remember the organization where they actually had a meeting of people and barred the press from being there.
Oh,
so,
interesting.
And knowing that it was going to be distorted, they just said, no, we're not going to have you. I'm sorry.
You know what? Let's make a distinction, if you don't mind, with all due respect, and that is we do have a media. It just happens to be, relatively speaking, more obscure, but that is A Better World Media. That is Democracy Now! That is Progressive Radio Network. That is Salon.com. That is Truth Dig. There are, actually a rather prolific group of what we call alternative media, but if anything, I would rather call it just thinking and progressive media without agendas, without a commercial agenda that is not corporately owned, that has its own mind. And you are on it right this very moment. And so is Swami Beyondananda. Yeah,
it's very true. Let me give you. I'll give you an example. When Bruce, Bruce has this best-selling book, Biology of Belief. It's been out 10 years, just in a second.
He was on again just a few weeks ago talking about the 10th anniversary. Yeah.
Now, one thing that you will never see is Bruce Lipton on NPR. Mm-hmm. One thing you'll never see is Bruce Lipton on Fresh Air NPR. They won't go near those ideas. They're stuck in the materialistic world, and it's not only because of the corporate influence, it's because of the limited
thinking,
belief of what Paul Ray would call
real.
Modern.
Yes.
And so when we had our book published, Spontaneous Evolution with Hay House, the only national media that we got was George Noory's Coast to Coast. We were on Coast to Coast, which is where all the woo-woo stuff and weird shit gets relegated.
Exactly.
But basically, to actually
that
have
is wild.
The New York Times is not going to review Spontaneous Evolution. The New York Times is not going to review Biology of Belief. It's not even on their radar. And so
I hear you.
And Wikipedia, there's another example. So what you have is a monopoly, some of it because of the corporatism, certainly reinforced by that, but also reinforced by a rigidified belief in the religion of science, not the practice of science, not science as a method, but science as a belief system, where they actually use words like dogma and heresy, which are words relegated to the religious domain.
Of course.
And so I think that's
part of Bruce makes a wonderful point of these. Yeah. No, I very much appreciate. Well, I feel that we are heading in a better direction, despite what it is going on with the Trumps and the other, powers of industry and captains of industry and government. I feel that there's a lot of good that is afoot, and I'm glad for it. And I actually feel that conversations like this, Steve, contribute to the overall morphogenetic field of thinking people in the domains of politics. And that needs to happen more and more, really enlivening, awakening conversations. Can I leave you with a thought? I'd love to get your thought about this. I recently I gave a talk a few months back to a wonderful group in Westchester, a group of us of the FIONS group, actually. It was the New York group of the Institute of Noetic Sciences on the board, and a number of my dear friends and colleagues are. And we were doing a presentation up at the Wainwright House. And
I know the Wainwright House very well. I'm glad it's still there.
Yes, it is there in all of its majesty, all of its New York, Westchester majesty. And I don't know what got hold of me, but after I walked everyone through a Qigong exercise called the Marriage of Heaven and Earth, I then opened up just completely spontaneously, and I hope I was evolving, and I said, if you really want to have peace in this world, I gotta say, I don't think it's that hard. And you have to also remember that I'm a psychotherapist and hypnotherapist, so I was definitely seeking to entrance my audience with what was otherwise considered very, very difficult, if not impossible, as something, no big deal. And so, yes, I was working on that level as well. However, I wanted to come back to this. I said, at that time things were really heating up around Ukraine and Crimea. What a crime, isn't it? And
Crimea River, Crimea River. I love that song.
I said, if we
Ukraine your neck and your Crimea River. Yes.
Yeah, right. I wanted to bring together Putin and Obama in Moscow or St. Petersburg, even better, and have a good Russian meal, and then followed by good Russian folk songs, so the heart, at least Putin's, would start to melt. And mine too, I'm Ukrainian. And the heart would open because of the music, the songs. You cannot control the opening of your heart when it comes to certain kinds of songs with which you were raised. That's number one. When the palate is full of your own delicious native cuisine, you're feeling soft and mushy. Then, to finish it off, a little good humor, a little ethnic humor, a little political humor, and then after that, you get everybody slapping each other's backs and laughing and smiling, as we were talking about the physiology of laughter and smiling. By the way, I wrote a piece for the Huffington Post about that physiology. Then they say, okay, now let's talk. We're jovial, we're happy, we're laughing together, we're exchanging glances during the laughter and the humor and everything. How are we going to be enemies? How can we do it? How do we create a world, Vladimir, where we can sit down like Mention and really do good things across the planet? Honorable mention, exactly. But anyway, that I firmly believe that people like Steve Behrman and Mitchell Rabin can help to bring this about. Give us the chance to be with these captains of industry and leaders of government to sit down for a period of time and laugh and humor and enjoy each other and come around to brass tacks, which would be for the good of all. Your thoughts?
I love that idea, and you may not know this, but Norman Cousins was involved in something very similar. There's a book which maybe you've read, maybe you haven't. I recommend it to everybody out there listening. It's by by James Douglas with 2 S's. It's called JFK and the Unspeakable: Why He Died and Why It Matters. And the book begins with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was essentially what you and I would call a near-death experience for both Kennedy and they came so close to the brink, and it was only Khrushchev instinctively responding to Kennedy and backing the missiles out of Cuba, and then Kennedy quietly took missiles out of Turkey 6 months later. The point is that they both had a near-death experience in 1962 at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and for the following year, until Kennedy was assassinated, they were involved in conversations, and part of the result of the conversation was the nuclear test ban moratorium, which Kennedy was able to convince many people in this country that was wise, including conservatives. And so we had that came out of a profound emotional experience, which in this case was a near-death experience.
So interesting.
At this point, I think it's interesting. I know people who they watch Russian TV, and they say, well, what do you want? They say, well, we know they're telling the truth about everything but Russia.
I've been on Russia Today. It's funny you say this,
Russia
which actually I think is quite a good show. Yeah,
and
that's
and
very
they have
interesting.
humor and all sorts of stuff. So, and I think that from my reading recently, the forces that Putin has been working against in the Soviet Union have been sources, have been the oligarchs, which are basically the mafia. So he's working against his own mafia, which, interestingly, believe it or not, is tied to Israel. Now, you and I are 2 nice Jewish boys, and we have to acknowledge the other, just as Islam has to deal with this most toxic form of medieval religion that is never matured and that thinks it wants to rule the world, just as Islam, in order to not become Waslam, has to deal with that. Israel, in order to not become Wasreal, has to deal with its own toxic beginnings. Israel began as a terrorist state. That Irgun, the first, those who created this revolution that began the state of Israel, they were terrorists. They bombed hotels, they killed civilians, and
very true.
Again, if I were a young 20-something-year-old Jewish individual in 1945, 46, 47, and having seen what had been done to my tribe, I would be with them. I would have been on the front lines with them. But nonetheless, it has to be acknowledged, just as America, the shadow pieces here have to do with the Native Americans and the black slaves, and then the workers that were exploited throughout all of that. So it's really important that all of our tribes, maybe we need truth and reconciliation worldwide. Maybe we need this new pope to just hear confession from every country, Maybe that's what we need. But the ceremony that would essentially acknowledge the perpetrations that have been done and allow it to heal through forgiveness.
That's true.
But in order to
just
have
like in South Africa,
like that,
just like the apartheid.
Similar,
I
exactly.
think it's a very, very good and very effective thing. I was dancing a little bit more on the surface, but not completely. But you took it a depth further, and I really do wholeheartedly agree that the atrocities that have been committed across the planet by every country really has to step up and take responsibility for its actions if we're really going to clear the slate for a brilliant, beautiful future. Steve Behrman, I want to just thank you and Swami Beyondananda so much for being on with me today. It's just truly a pleasure and deep honor. You're a wonderful thinker and really good comedian. And when you put these two together, you get Swami Beyondananda. And really glad to have you on.
Well, it was a wonderful conversation. I love conversations more than interviews because you never actually know where the conversation is going to go. It can end up in new territory. The people who are listening are not hearing just prepared little pieces. They are hearing an evolved discourse.
That's right.
Or is it a death course? Is it discourse or death course? I can't figure it out.
I don't know, but I do know it's a spontaneous evolution. That I know.
This is very exciting. We can probably
it really is, and thank you.
Like this in the fall when I come to New York. So thank you for having me so much.
I would love to. Absolutely, Steve. Okay. Such a pleasure. Thank you again. Give your website out so people can tune in.
WakeUpLaughing.com. Send me an email at info@wakeuplaughing.com. I'll send you a gift. I'll put you on our mailing list. And you can get Swami's daily laughs at it every day to restore regular hilarity.
I love it. Very good. Steve Behrman, thank you so much. And a big warm hello to your wonderful wife, Trudy, as well, from A Better World.
Thank you, Mitchell.
Sure. Steve Behrman, also known as Swami Beyondananda, truly a real gentleman and a real thinker, using humor just so wittily and brilliantly to get his points across. And there's nothing like a touch of humor, nothing, in fact, that lightens our lives up and brings us to a place of discourse and, I wish he were still on, intercourse, where we can have a lot of fun. So thank you all for joining us again today. It's always such a pleasure to have you on with me and listening to my wonderful guests each and every week. Remember to visit us at www.abetterworld.tv. Remember, we are also a 501c3, a Better World Foundation, which sustains us. So any contributions, investments in a better world are always appreciated. You can reach me also directly for consultations, or I love your feedback. So just write to me at mjr@abetterworld.net, MJR, my initials, at abetterworld.net, and make sure to get on our mailing list and receive our weekly newsletters. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.